All right, so you build a cube and it's super sweet. You bring it out, you draft with some friends, and you get some feedback afterwards. Fun cube, I couldn't quite get niche synergy piece X to work though. Or I really liked it, but why is this egregious power outlier in here? Or I would have loved a second copy of this other card. Or the power level range of this cube is all over the place, and I think the cube could benefit from more consistency. Or you should have these 12 cards that I emotionally resonate with that do not fit your design goals. Or wow, I'm drunk. So this presentation is about singleton versus non-singleton and whether it's right for your cube. But to do that, we need to investigate what a cube was. A cube was initially a format invented in Toronto in the mid 90s by a bunch of Canadian professionals. It spread around from there, but the concept was that you would gather all your favorite cards together, you'd put them in a box, and you'd draft with your friends. So this is what an opening pack might have looked like at the time. It included all the bangers and all the hits in the past, including Mana Crypt, Balance, Upheaval, etc. It was called a cube because a cube had six sides, and if there were six categories of cards, that would be 60 cards for each side of the cube, which created 360 cards. That was a bit about how its origin started. However, in 2006, you begin to see a bit of a change in how Cube is talked about, online especially. One of the first writers to really write about Cube was Evan Irwin, who described it as 50 of the best cards of each color, 50 of the best multicolor cards, 50 of the best artifact cards, and 50 of the best lands. But obviously, this is not a ton of curation. So that you end up with cards like Gaia Skyfolk being played in his cube, not because it was a great card, but it was just because you needed a blue-green card, and Gaia Skyfolk was one of the only blue-green cards that existed, so you put it in your cube. It was really the pro player's kitchen table magic. It was less about how to present something cohesive and what is it like to play with Magic's most powerful cards in a draft format. But you do start to see some amount of curation go into these environments. One writer described leaving out Black Lotus and Soul Ring out of their cube and adding in cards like Balance because they actually required some setup and players to build around them. All right, so Cube at the time was this collection of 360 to sometimes 540 cards. It was drafted in packs of 15, and it were singleton, partially because this achieved the most amount of perceived replayability. There was a lot of aesthetic comfort, and this is all steeped in tradition. So this is how you end up at the cube being defined in these terms. But nowadays, Cube is totally different. You have so many people playing Cube, which means so many cubes out there that exist, which means it can be really, really hard for your own cube to stand out. So, really, a lot of this is talking about how you get your own cube to stand out. And there are a number of ways to do that. You can lean heavily into a certain theme, like including all the best cards in Modern and letting people jam archetypes in the past, or having a unique premise like a 72 card pocket cube where you can just fit it in your pocket and you jam games as you go, where there's no minimum deck size. Or you can put, I don't know, 8 copies of Mana Drain in your cube. The TLDR, though, there's an appropriate amount of variance for each cube, and variance in and of itself is not a good or bad thing. All of these attempts here, including the heavily non-singleton breaking or the really limiting the cube size, is all just variance management. And we're going to talk a little bit about how singleton and non-singleton fits into that. Because at the end of the day, it's a tool you can use in your cube designs. Singleton as a tool is really good for a number of things. It's really good for achieving the maximum amount of variety per cube size. It's really good at including lots of different card effects, which is another aspect of variety. And it's an easy to follow heuristic. Also, the spreadsheet aesthetics are on point. There's only one of each card, so it just looks so neat and organized in a little list. Non-singleton as a tool is really good for increased drafting gameplay consistency. Some cards are just cooler than others, and this lets you play more copies of the cool cards, and it gives you much more freedom with archetype and package support. So that's why I usually prefer non-singleton design, because I think it will probably yield better gameplay. Let's talk about your design goals. You can go through singleton and non-singleton. If you're designing a cube based around nostalgia, right, and you want to include Snapcaster Mage, singleton design will mean that you are going to include some Sphinx of Lost Spruce in there too, and that's not fantastic. So I often say that non-singleton design is better for environments focused around nostalgia, environments focused around gameplay, or environments in which balance is a primary consideration of the format. This is an example from my friend Ollie Beek's cube called Doubleton Synergy, where you guessed it, there are 2 copies of each card in the cube, which encourages a lot of cross synergies as well, but it also looks still really neat on a spreadsheet. So if spreadsheet aesthetics is something you care about, this is one of the ways you can be non-singleton and also achieve this. There's a lot of greater support for some of the archetypes that you have because you just include more copies of the cards that work well for them instead of some jank cards that might not quite fit as well. It also people mention a lot about non-signal design, about how signaling is weird. I disagree. I think it's a bit easier, especially if you're coming from retail limited, where you expect multiple copies of certain cards to be there. And nobody cares in retail limited that you don't exactly know how many copies of each card are going to be in the draft pool. It's something you work around. It's an expected variable, right? Same thing for non-singleton design here. You easily can design environments that work this way. Retail limited has for a long time. Also, the signal is a bit easier to read because if you see a card that works great for your deck that comes late and is a copy of a card you already have, it tells you that the archetype is probably open. And if you don't see a second copy of that card, then you know that the archetype is probably not as open. So it's actually much easier to read an environment during the draft this way too. Lastly, you decrease the variance a little bit, which I think is good because Magic is already a game of high variance, and this is a way to lower the variance level quite a little bit. So really, I think signal designs are really good for environments that can get played a lot. So if you're some Joe Anderson sicko who's got your cube played 240 times, 250 times, or whatever it is, you ask Joe, it's always changing because the cube gets played all the time. Or if your cube is on like MTGO, as Matt Grenier's A Study in Harmony cube is, then I do think singleton design can work for you, but I think this is a really small percentage of cubes. There are a couple other ways in which singleton design can work, and the primary example is if you just need your cube to exist. Deliberating over the card choices is too daunting for you, so you just decide to put it in a box together, go draft it with your friends, and take it from there. I think that's a perfect use of singleton design. I also think that singleton design works for really small cubes, in which the density of unique card effects needs to exist first before you can decide which other cards to include. So, like the 72 card pocket cube I mentioned earlier, it's a great example, great use of singleton design. Also, if your design goals are not altruistic and the whole goal of the cube is to include more cards you like my friend's cube, which I will not read off that title for you. You are more than welcome to do that for yourself. It was too long. It didn't even fit in the Discord screenshot that I was able to get it in. But he will readily admit that his design goals are not altruistic and he just wants to play more cards that he likes. Awesome. Perfect. So it really leads me to my best reason to be non-singleton. It's because you want to. If you want to adhere to those gameplay aesthetics, if you want to adhere to the spreadsheet aesthetics, if you want to adhere to that type of design, you're more than welcome to. Ultimately, Cube is a form of self-expression, and if you think singleton will help you achieve that level of self-expression more, then you should absolutely do it. And because really, what am I other than some random person on the internet that's giving you opinions? You should really be able to do whatever you want. But if your goal is to achieve the best design, meet your design goals the best, then I think that non-single design is probably going to be the best way to do it. Because I think singleton, in a way that I've mentioned some people have relied on in the past, has been more of a crutch rather than an aid to the design process. I get a lot of questions when I talk about singleton versus non-single design. So here are some of the more common ones I've seen. We'll do a little bit of a question and answer thing for it too. One of the questions I get a lot is, what if players assume the environment is singleton or forget, or they say a second copy of a card? Well, the answer is really doesn't matter. It rarely comes up that someone sees the second copy. If they do, sweet. They get a second copy of the cool card and they're happy. Won't players get bored? No, not really. Draft of Magic is enough variance, more than people want to give it credit for, and it's really hard to get bored over a drafted cube. Really, only if your cube is being drafted so many times, like I mentioned earlier, will this ever happen, and even then, it's still pretty rare. Think of how many times you generally have to draft a limited retail set before you even get bored, right? Usually it's around 7, 8, 10 times for the worst sets, right? And if any cube is getting drafted that much in today's day and age, you're already doing well. And the best part about cube is you can just change it anytime you want. You can just change out core themes, swap out whole sections of cards, because that's really, really hard for a cube to get bored. But won't players be irked by the haphazard spreadsheet aesthetics? The answer is no. Players don't notice this, and if they do, they don't care. If they're a player, their primary concern is the gameplay. That's what they're there for, is to play the game. So they do not care if your spreadsheet aesthetics are a little off or there are an extra couple copies of a card in there. For those of you that have decided, as of now, that non-singleton design is something that you want to pursue, here are some of the ways that I think you can try to deduce how many copies of a card are right for your cube. Number one is vibes. The vibes are good, go for it. You'll figure it out over time. Number two, you can decide on either copies per player or copies per archetype. Both of those heuristics are really good for deciding how many copies of a card you want in your cube. Or you can go with the Baltimore Singleton approach, which is just breaking Singleton on the mana base. Here's one I do for my World Championship Museum. It's kind of vibesy, but I do break singleton in the mana base because I think it's really important. Because at the end of the day, Searing Spear can go to hell. This is a copy from my friend Judge Bones, who admits that why would you play a Searing Spear and a Lightning Strike when you can just play 2 Lightning Strikes? At the end of the day, what matters is we all get out with our friends and we go cube. And really what I'm trying to do is just get everyone to make their cubes fit their design goals to the best so that their friends can have the most fun.